The Bermuda Triangle killed its last victim decades ago, not because it became safer, because we finally understood what it actually was. Imagine standing on the deck of a ship somewhere between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, watching the horizon. The water looks exactly like it does everywhere else in the Atlantic. Same color, same depth, same wind. And yet, for decades, this region carried a reputation so powerful that pilots requested alternate routes, and the phrase Bermuda Triangle became shorthand for the unexplainable. Then, the disappearances stopped. The mystery quietly faded, and almost nobody stopped to ask the most obvious question. Not why so many things vanished here, but why they stopped vanishing. The story begins in December 1945, and it begins with a man named Charles Taylor. Taylor was the flight leader of a routine Navy training exercise out of Fort Lauderdale. 5 Avenger torpedo bombers, 14 men, a simple triangular route over the Atlantic. He was flying borrowed instruments that day because his personal compass was being repaired. Within an hour of beginning the return leg, Taylor became convinced he was somewhere he wasn't. His transmissions that afternoon recorded a man trying to navigate by landmarks that didn't match his actual position, fuel running low, daylight failing, 5 aircraft following him deeper into open ocean because he was in command and he was certain. Try to put yourself in Taylor's position. He's leading 14 men into the unknown. In his hands are borrowed, unfamiliar instruments. Below him is the endless, indifferent Atlantic, and his compass is telling him something he simply refuses to believe. This isn't a ghost story. This is the raw human fear of being wrong, a fear that forced him to pull the yoke deeper into the open ocean until there was nothing left in the tanks but air. Flight 19 almost certainly ditched after dark in heavy seas when the fuel ran out. The rescue aircraft sent to find them, a PBM Mariner flying boat known to its own crews as the flying gas tank for its tendency to accumulate explosive fuel vapor, was seen exploding in the sky by witnesses on a nearby ship. 27 men gone in one afternoon, a borrowed compass and a wrong turn. That is the true story of the incident that launched one of the most powerful myths of the 20th century. What followed over the next decade fed the mythology further. In 1948, the Star Tiger vanished on approach to Bermuda with 31 people aboard. Its last transmission was routine. No distress call, no wreckage, no explanation that satisfied the public. The captain's name was Brian McMillan. He had flown the route before. The weather that night was reported as acceptable. He simply never arrived. 4 months later, the Star Tiger's sister aircraft, the Star Ariel, disappeared on a flight from Bermuda to Jamaica. Then a DC-3 approaching Miami from San Juan. Each disappearance reported in the shadow of all the ones before it, each one seemingly confirming that something was wrong with this particular stretch of ocean. By the time writer Vincent Gaddis coined the term Bermuda Triangle in 1964, there was enough accumulated mystery to fill several books. Charles Berlitz obliged. His 1974 bestseller sold millions of copies worldwide and cemented the region's reputation as a place where the laws of physics occasionally took a break. Berlitz collected every disappearance, every strange compass reading, every account of unusual fog and inexplicable time distortion. The book was compelling. It was also almost entirely misleading. The man who killed the Bermuda Triangle was not a scientist or a naval investigator. He was a librarian. Lawrence David Cush from Arizona did something remarkably simple. He went back to the original sources. Not the books about the triangle, the actual Lloyd's of London shipping records, the U.S. Coast Guard incident reports, the original newspaper accounts from the dates of the alleged disappearances, the official military inquiry transcripts. What he found was a pattern of selective omission, factual error, and in some cases, outright fabrication. Ships Berlitz claimed had vanished without trace in calm conditions had actually sunk in violent storms documented in weather records. Vessels listed as disappearing inside the triangle had gone down hundreds of miles outside it. Some of the ships on Berlitz's list had never existed at all. The most quoted statistic, that the triangle had an anomalously high rate of disappearances, turned out to be based on no statistical analysis whatsoever. It was an assertion repeated so many times it had acquired the status of fact.
Lloyd's of London responded to direct questions about the triangle in the 1970s with characteristic bluntness. They did not charge higher premiums for ships crossing the region. They saw no statistical evidence of unusual losses. The U.S. Coast Guard said the same. When the numbers were actually examined, the Bermuda Triangle did not register as statistically dangerous. The North Sea, the South China Sea, the waters around Indonesia, all genuinely elevated risk. The triangle between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico was, by the data, an ordinary stretch of ocean, one of the busiest in the world, which meant more traffic, more opportunities for things to go wrong, and more incidents to report, but not more incidents per crossing than anywhere else. The region does have real characteristics that explain the losses without requiring anything beyond physics and human error. The weather is genuinely unpredictable and genuinely violent. Warm Gulf Stream currents meeting cooler Atlantic water, generating sudden storms that developed faster than mid-century forecasting could track. The Gulf Stream itself moves fast enough to disperse floating wreckage across hundreds of miles within hours. The seafloor contains the Puerto Rico Trench at 8,376 meters, the deepest point in the entire Atlantic. Aircraft and ships that went down in deep water stayed there, not because of any mysterious force, but because recovery technology simply could not reach them. The absence of wreckage was not evidence of the supernatural. It was evidence of an ocean floor that was, in practical terms, unreachable. Going back to Taylor, his story is worth finishing properly. The details that explained what happened to Flight 19 were available in the original military records the entire time. They simply did not appear in Berlitz's version of the story because they were less compelling than the alternative. The most famous mystery in aviation history was a navigation error and a borrowed compass. That's it. The mythology began eroding not in a single moment, but gradually, under the weight of its own contradictions. Cush's book planted doubt. The insurance data became public. The Coast Guard repeatedly stated the region had no special characteristics. And then, the world changed around the myth. By the 1990s, satellite tracking, GPS navigation, and real-time weather data had systematically eliminated the conditions that had made this region genuinely hazardous. The sudden storms that caught pilots by surprise could now be tracked hours in advance. The positional uncertainty that sent Taylor in the wrong direction was rendered impossible by satellite navigation. The radio silence that had seemed mysterious was explained by the simple fact that mid-century communication over open ocean was unreliable. Remove the information gaps and the navigational uncertainty, and the Bermuda Triangle became what it had always actually been, a busy stretch of ocean with challenging conditions. Nobody talks about what the myth actually cost. Not in money, in people. The last significant disappearance attributed to the triangle in mainstream media was the cargo ship El Faro, which sank in October 2015 with 33 crew members during Hurricane Joaquin, a Category 4 storm with winds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour. The wreck was found in 2016 at 4,600 meters depth. The voyage data recorder was recovered. The final hours were reconstructed in detail from bridge communications. There was nothing mysterious about what happened to El Faro. A captain made fatal decisions about routing around a storm. A ship had known structural vulnerabilities. A hurricane was exceptional. The Bermuda Triangle was mentioned in early coverage and quietly dropped once the actual sequence of events became clear. But for the families of the 33 men who died, the mythology that had surrounded this region for decades told them there was no point looking for answers because there were none. In several earlier cases, the actual explanations, mechanical failure, severe weather,
navigational error, were available in official records, but were never widely reported because they were less compelling than the mystery. The mundane truth was crowded out by the extraordinary fiction. For the people directly affected, this was the difference between grief with understanding and grief without it. What the Bermuda Triangle actually represents, stripped of the mythology, is a case study in how humans process fear and uncertainty. In the decades after World War II, the ocean had a capacity for taking lives without explanation that felt intolerable. The triangle gave that intolerance a location, a name, and a narrative. It said, "There is a place where the rules do not apply, where something beyond understanding is at work." The alternative, that experienced pilots and seasoned sailors were dying in the dark because the ocean is enormous and indifferent, was harder to live with. A mystery is more bearable than randomness. The technology that made the myth obsolete did not make the ocean safe. Ships still sink. Aircraft still go down over water. What changed is that the gap between event and explanation narrowed to almost nothing. A vessel in distress now transmits its precise GPS coordinates automatically. Weather systems invisible to a 1945 pilot are tracked from space and delivered to cockpit screens in real time. The navigational confusion that doomed Flight 19 is not possible in a world of satellite navigation. The conditions that fed the myth have been engineered out of existence one by one, not because the ocean changed, but because humans got better at reading it. The Bermuda Triangle is still there, between Miami and Bermuda and Puerto Rico. The water is still deep. The weather is still occasionally violent. Vessels cross it every day without ceremony, without elevated insurance premiums, without requesting alternate routes. The last time you stood on a ship deck and looked at that horizon, the water looked exactly like it does everywhere else in the Atlantic. Now you know why. The mystery didn't move somewhere else. It dissolved into something more useful. A clearer understanding of what the ocean actually is and of what it is always required from the people who cross it. Not supernatural caution, just competence, information, and respect for the scale of what lies beneath. The Bermuda Triangle stopped being dangerous for the same reason ghost stories stop working. When you turn the lights on, the shadows have nowhere left to hide. The darkness that sustained the myth, incomplete information, unreliable navigation, an ocean too deep to give back its dead, has been replaced piece by piece by data. Not perfectly, but enough. The ocean remains capable of surprises. It always will. But the specific combination of ignorance and fear that created the myth no longer exists in the same form. The triangle is still there. The water is still deep. The weather is still occasionally violent. Vessels still cross it every day, tiny against the immensity, everything normal. Everything exactly as it should be.